Welcome. So we're going to start right out. Welcome to the Ask Father Jack show. We're pleased to be back with our second edition, and this time we're going to focus on religious liberty. Joining us today is Dr. Kathleen Raviel and, of course, Father Jack. Kathleen Raviel is our special guest, and the Ask Father Jack show is a program dedicated to answering your questions about the Catholic faith. We hope to provide guideposts for our listeners by clarifying questions and concerns that you may have. Along the way, we may just interject some faith, a little hope, and definitely a little levity in sometimes a confusing world. Before we begin, let's introduce our godly counsel, Father Jack Durkin. Father Jack Durkin has been a priest in the Atlanta Archdiocese for the past 17 years, 10 of those as pastor of St. Monica's in Duluth. Previous to entering the priesthood, Father Jack began his life's mission as a dedicated teacher and running coach. When not leading his parish, Father Jack can be found following local sports, including his beloved Philadelphia Eagles. No
I don't want to hear any boos. I also cheer for the Falcons.
Dr. Kathleen Raviel, thank you for being with us this evening. Dr. Raviel is one of the most well-respected pro-life Catholic doctors in both Georgia and the United States. She is a board-certified gynecologist in private practice in Atlanta since 1985, who is the past president of the Catholic Medical Association. Dr. Raviel is a consultant for the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, pro-life secretariat, and a volunteer medical director for the Pregnancy Aid Clinic in Atlanta. She is certified to teach 4 methods of natural family planning and a medical consultant in NAPRO technology, handling women's medical issues in accordance with our Catholic faith. Dr. Raviel has testified frequently at the Georgia State Capitol on all human life issues and is up to date on political issues related to women's health and other medical issues. Dr. Raviel is a faithful Catholic doctor, and we're very blessed that she could join us this evening. Thank you, Dr. Raviel, for being here. Well, welcome back. Tonight we're going to focus on religious liberty in particular, and just to remind everyone of the questions, if you would like to participate in tonight's show, we would like you to do so by submitting written questions to Pat Shivers, who's standing in the back. Ablaze listeners, if we'd like to hear from you, you can submit your questions in one of 3 ways. And if we could flip to the screen there. You can, you changed it up for me. You can do so by leaving us a message on the radio studio line at 770-813-9949. Reach out to us on social media via Facebook and Twitter with hashtag AskAblazeRadio, or email us your questions directly at askablaze@stmonicas.com. Father Jack and Dr. Raviel, with the country under the new leadership of President Trump and the constantly shifting political landscape, there seems to be many questions on the minds of our audience members tonight and our listeners. Have you yourselves heard or seen many questions about how the new president will answer these concerns and how his policies will impact our faith in particular? Would you like to address that at all?
Well, I had the privilege of going to the March for Life in Washington in January, and for the first time ever, high-level people in the administration addressed the crowd there. Kellyanne Conway came on and addressed the crowd, and she promised to great cheers that President Trump was going to stop all funding for Planned Parenthood within the next month. And then Vice President Pence also spoke, which the Vice President or President have never spoken at a rally. There may have been video conferencing in, but never actually speak. And Vice President Pence also said that the pro-life agenda was very important to this administration. So I have great hope that we're going to see some very hopeful changes over the next 4 years and hopefully 8 years.
Yes, and if we've been watching the news recently, the initiatives to change some of the legislation or to actually enact some of the laws that were already on the books that were not being enforced. So what we see is this opportunity of wherein, first of all, we've been heard, and secondly, we see movement now from the executive branch and also from the legislative branch together to roll back some of the very aggressive legislation that occurred over the last 8 years. And so what we need to do, of course, is to continue to push and to make public and to promote legislation on all levels. There's been a lot of effective legislation on the local and state level that can be endangered by what's happening on the federal level. And what we're finding is this is going to free up a lot of opportunity on the state level. So we want to just continue. There's been, I don't remember all the exact name of the legislation and so forth, but it's certainly, it's been a long time since there's been hopeful movement on the national level and on the federal level to really support pro-life initiatives. And so we're happy about that. That's a good thing.
I think that's wonderful. If we could just, if you want to dive into the first question, one of the questions that we've seen repetitively is in regards to the Affordable Care Act and its effects on all of our health plans, our employer-based health plans. We've seen repeated questions come through. If you are participating in an employer-based health plan that may not follow the entire scope of our faith beliefs, are we participating in explicit evil by doing so? If our healthcare coverage covers abortifacients and contraception, is that considered, for our participation, are we considered to be part of that?
Well, when we talk about, it's obvious that we're participating because we're a member of a particular insurance plan. We're participating in it. Our business is supporting it. So we have cooperation, and there's two types of cooperation. One is material, wherein by virtue of money, by virtue of funding and or actually a physical way of helping out, I'm assisting in an evil. But there's also formal cooperation where I actually intend that. I want that to be done. So what we see is our culture has become, in a certain way, so toxic. And do-harm medicine has now been promoted so thoroughly since the introduction, particularly of oral contraceptives, that what's happened is health care, you better be careful when somebody says health care, because they may mean aborting a child. They may mean a vasectomy for a man. They may mean taking a 10-year-old boy and actually mutilating him to change him into physically appearing as a girl. So as Catholics, first of all, we have to say health care. Just because we have health insurance in no way means it's health insurance. Secondly, we have to look at that and say, what are the aspects of this insurance that contradict natural law? Because we're not talking about Catholic, particular aspects of the Catholic Church that we're asking people to believe. We're talking about what humans throughout the course of history have generally understood to be correct, which is to say fertility is not an illness, okay? A child deserves to be protected, not killed. A person who is male should thank God for his physical being and should not mutilate it. So what we understand is we should not have to in any way support that. Now we may be, just by having the insurance, materially cooperating with that. Where do we begin? That's the problem, right? Do we just freak out and not have any insurance? The first thing we begin with is disagreeing with the company about what is health insurance. We should say, for example, generally speaking, the use of contraception is supporting immorality. It's supporting sex that's not related to having children and promoting and supporting promiscuity in our culture. We should be saying, if someone were to be able to get contraceptives, that should not be on our bill, particularly since we know that oral contraceptives for women can increase the chance for further health issues down the line, including cancer. We're actually going to increase health cost insurance for supporting an unhealthy introduction of medicine that's not needed because the woman's fertility is just fine. And so when you start promoting do-harm medicine, you're not only supporting things that are immoral, you're also increasing the chance that there'll be more health issues further down the line. We're talking about health. And so I think the first thing we as Catholics need to do is to be in that dialogue about defining health care, okay? Because remember, according to the Affordable Care Act, from the executive level, they could define health care. So now the current president could say, well, I don't think contraception is health care. And we need to be encouraging and saying, Mr. President, we don't think contraception is health care. We don't think abortion is health care. We don't think, and that's why some people who do not agree with this feel threatened, because they should. Because that is something that on the executive level, they determine what health care is. So what are we doing? We should be writing to our health insurance companies and saying, I want to pay for authentic health care for people. I would like on my health care package to have NFP as what we teach people if they run into difficulties in terms either of having children, NAPRO technology, or in terms of danger in having children, in which case they may actually limit the possibility of having that child in the same level that the use of oral contraceptions would do. But it's much healthier for the woman and healthier for the couple. So what we should be doing is saying, we shouldn't be paying for NFP. We should not be paying for contraception. We should be paying for NFP. We should be looking for what is authentically healthy for women and for men, and authentically healthy in terms of promoting moral decisions. You say, well, should we legislate morality? Yes, we should. All through history, a lot of our legislation has to do with morality. If someone is breaking into my house, it's against the law. That's a moral issue, okay? So yes, we should be legislating morality. And basically a lot of legislation's about abusing a baseline of morality, minimal morality, okay? So things that we might tolerate as a culture. Somebody maybe could purchase contraception on their own. We might tolerate that, even though that's not good. But we should not have to materially support it with our money. If I work at a business and they're taking a certain amount of money from the profits of that business to pay for that insurance, we should not be supporting that insurance. We should be seeking other models, if at all possible, of insurance. You know, as we're moving through this, I think what people need to acknowledge is we're in a toxic situation. You're not going to be able to run off. We can't use the Amish alternative and go live isolated from society, but we have to begin to push back against the evil that's already occurring and that we are cooperating with materially to some degree. You know, I don't want to go into material cooperation because it's quite complicated, you know, whether it's immediate or whether it's proximate or whether it's, I don't want to go into all those because that is a very dicey thing to dissect. But if you know your insurance covers things that you disagree with, the first thing you need to do is to write to the company to say, I don't think we should be paying for this, right?
Right.
Okay. Why? First of all, because I don't support it. Secondly, because I think it's bad for the people who use it. We also have a love for the person using do-harm medicine. We know that if a woman has an abortion, it harms her, both physically and emotionally, okay? So it's not that we're against health, it's that we're for authentic health. We have to define terms. Remember, in the culture, health does not necessarily mean health. Everybody else may have a different idea of what health is. We want to look at health based on true biology, based on natural law. Doctor, did you have anything to add?
Under the Affordable Care Act, the Catholic Medical Association and the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops said from the beginning that this was going to expand coverage for abortion. The Catholic Health Association denied that and agreed with the Affordable Care Act, but it became very obvious shortly thereafter because under that act, when people bought individual plans, most of those plans actually provided coverage for abortion. And you could not even find out until after you purchased the plan that it covered abortions. So for the first, and then people who bought those plans, if they were then subsidized with government money, essentially we taxpayers were now paying for abortion because we were subsidizing those plans. And then in 2012, the Secretary of Health and Human Services, who has tremendous power under this legislation, decided that all plans would provide, as Father Jack said, free contraceptives, free sterilization, free morning after pill, free IUD. Some of these products cost well over $1,000, and that's what drove up the cost of everybody's health care because they were now paying this. And not only was that mandated, but Catholic institutions would be required to have that coverage. Now you may say, well, you know what, a lot of Catholics are using contraception. Well, that doesn't matter. The Catholic institution is standing for the teachings of the Catholic Church. They shouldn't be forced to provide these devices. And so cases went through the Supreme Court. The Little Sisters of the Poor was a classical example, a group of nuns who are taking care of the elderly and the sick and the infirm who don't have other resources. They have a lot of employees who work for them. They were being forced to provide contraception, IUD, sterilization to their employees, and they went to the Supreme Court over it. It was very interesting. The new papal nuncio to the United States, Archbishop Christophe Pierre, is from Rennes, France, and that's where the Little Sisters of the Poor was founded. And his mother was taken care of by the Little Sisters of the Poor. So it's ironical that Pope Francis appointed him to be papal nuncio to the United States. But that is what's driven up the cost of health care. The Affordable Care Act did not provide affordable care. It provided a once-a-year well-person visit with high premiums every month, high deductibles. So when people actually did get sick, they couldn't afford the care. They couldn't afford the surgery, they couldn't afford the procedures, they couldn't afford the x-rays, the CT scans, and all that. So hopefully with the reforming and the repeal of the Affordable Care Act, we're going to have health care plans where people can designate what they want covered on their plan and can exclude everything that they know is immoral, but especially abortion. And even beyond this, the state of California last year mandated that every single health insurance plan in California would have coverage for abortion. Every Catholic hospital, every Catholic diocese, every Catholic institution had to have coverage for abortion. It went to the Department of Health and Human Services under President Obama, and they said, oh no, that's perfectly legitimate. And they said, no, you will have to provide abortion coverage. Well, I don't think that's going to hold up any longer, but
Right.
that was clearly a violation of the Weldon Amendment, which has protected abortion bills from covering abortion and all that for several years. So I have great hope under this
Yes.
administration that this persecution of Catholics especially, but all Christians, is going to come to an end or be greatly ameliorated.
With the new administration coming in and with the new Secretary of Health under Secretary Tom Price, what can we do to affect that change on our own and to work to help include pregnancy crisis centers as part of our programs with our employee health, NFP? What do you foresee or what have you seen that we could utilize as tools to help advocate for that change?
Well, actually, we can bill insurance companies now for natural family planning services, so that's really kind of covered already. The state of Georgia, I think, passed legislation last year that did provide some funding for crisis pregnancy centers. The important thing will be to stop any funding for Planned Parenthood in the state of Georgia. They are the single largest provider of abortion in the world. They provide something like 1/3 of all abortions in the United States. They are not for women's health. They do not do mammograms. They do not do well visits. They are basically providing contraception and abortion. There is an organization, a political action committee through the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops called the NCHLA, the National Committee for Human Life Amendment. It's basically the political action committee. They have a website you can go to, the nchla.org. You can sign up to get their alert blasts. And every time something's coming up at the federal level in Congress that would be of interest to Catholics, they'll send you an email. All you do is click on it. They know from where you live they know your senator, but they'll know who your representative is, and you can send a pre-done email to your representatives and your senators. And that's a very easy way to have your voice heard. You know, we used to do the postcard campaigns in church. Well, now you can do it by email very quickly.
Absolutely.
That's, Dr. Ravel, is your opinion of the new type of healthcare organizations like MediShare or those Christian groups that bring that healthcare program together?
I think they're great. I mean, health savings accounts are wonderful. I think those are going to be reenacted. MediShare is a program where you have a pool of people who share the medical expenses of those who are in the pool, and that's a logical way to do it, is to be able to share your expenses.
Wonderful. I think at this point we're going to take a question from the audience. Andrew, if you'd help us. Gail, do you have a question?
Yes. My question was, how do we make sure that organizations that solicit us for donations, I'm sure that everybody gets several a day, that they're in alignment with our Catholic values before we agree to make any contribution?
Now, I do know, and I can't remember exactly the website, there are organizations that vet out all the various organizations that you give to and look for abuses against, for example, fetal stem cell research. So, and I forget the name of the website, but they have websites that actually look. Does anyone know what that is here? I think, but I forget who gave that to me. I do know who has an answer to that. This is, I know that.
We can find that.
That Kathleen McCusker has the answer to that, because she sent me, for example, one organization that was promoted at the public supermarket. I would walk out and I'd say, I'm not going to support this organization because they support fetal stem cell research to help children who are handicapped. What's that? Human Life International. So if you go there, they're looking at all these organizations that often have very good intentions of helping people with diseases, whether that be cancer, whether that be handicapped children. But what we find is the means they're using to address this often are an expensive promotion of fetal stem cell research that has proven to be completely ineffective when we've had very effective research with adult stem cells and also with cord blood stem cells. So what it is it's, on the one hand, it's immoral, but on the other hand, it's also ineffective and impractical. And so, strictly speaking, the church herself does not speak out against stem cell research, just stem cell research related to the murder of children. But we're open to any authentic science that does not abuse an individual person. So you need to be careful, because it's the same when people are looking at curing cancer, for example. We found support from cancer organizations promoting activities that actually lead to breast cancer for women. So I think support for Planned Parenthood from one of the big fundraisers. So, you know, a lot of these big promotions, we're excited about curing cancer, but not by actually encouraging women to take oral contraception or to support abortion, when both of those, we know, have a very high rate of cancer risk for women. So we want to think rationally about this, and we want to remember what these organizations are yoking themselves to. Because what happens is an organization like Planned Parenthood benefits when it joins itself to these things that everyone wants. I want to cure cancer. And so they yoke themselves to this, and what are you doing? You're handing out oral contraception, promoting abortion, and we know both of these increase very much the risk of cancer. It's a very evil thing, but we have to be careful with that. So I would look at that organization, because that's what I do if I'm going to give. Although what I've done at this point, I don't give to a whole bunch of organizations. I figured out the ones I like and I give to those, and that's enough, you know, and that's how I've kind of skinned that particular cat.
Yeah, I agree. I would be very selective on who you donate to. You can also, I think, go on Charity Navigator and see what % of the money they collect goes to the charity. because sometimes you'll find various organizations, a very small amount goes to that charity. But a prime example is the Susan G. Komen Fund with all the walks and all that. And for years, there was a lot of rumbling in the background that, this organization donates to Planned Parenthood. Finally, Karen Hendel's experience working for the Susan G. Komen Fund, when she went on board with them, she tried to get them to stop funding Planned Parenthood. I mean, it was, I think, $385,000 a year that they were giving to Planned Parenthood. And the process had already been in process for it to be defunded. She just kind of came in at the point where they were going to shut the door on Planned Parenthood, and the horrible attack that came against her and Susan G. Komen by Planned Parenthood was phenomenal. And so she finally had to leave the job. They still are giving money to Planned Parenthood. So you have to be very selective who you donate to.
Well, Gail, just as a follow-up, what we can do with Ablaze Radio is we'll find those websites available for you. We will post them and also put them on our Facebook page. They'll be available for you to see at that point. At this time, we're going to take a short break, and we'll be back with Ask Father Jack in just a moment. Welcome back to the Ask Father Jack show. Tonight, our subject matter is religious liberty. If you'd like to submit your questions about our Catholic Church or our faith, or have a suggestion for an upcoming theme in our show, you can do so in one of three ways. Leave us a message on the radio studio line at 770-813-9949. Reach out to us on social media via Facebook and Twitter with the handle hashtag #AskAblazeRadio. Let me redo that. Hashtag #AskAblazeRadio, or email us your questions directly at askablaze@stmonicas.com. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Raviel and Father Jack, for those great answers to some of these difficult questions we've been facing. We're going to turn the page a little bit and talk about marriage issues and family issues. And Carol, would you like to ask us your question, please?
Thank you. Father, can you offer practical guidance for relating to those with homosexual or other gender-related challenges? We hear a lot about gay rights and the talk of being tolerant or condemning, being compassionate or being judgmental. Thank you.
I think that, of course, we always lead with love, and love desires what is best for the other. For a while, I was able to join with the men and women at Courage who struggle with homosexuality and are seeking to live courageously a life of celibacy, to live chastity according to their particular call. That they happen, most of them because they're older, it's pretty locked in, their sexual attraction to people of the same sex. So with that given, they realize they're called by Jesus Christ to live a celibate life. And of course, a priest is great to go visit them because they go, hey, I am too. Because of your particular orientation, you're called to live celibacy as your chastity. It doesn't mean that you could not have a great and deep friendship with someone of the same sex, but that you would be seeking to live in chastity. Think about this logically. If you're a male living with another male, there's never been anything wrong with that. What the church sees as evil would be to commit an act of sexual relations with that person, okay? So the church wants to make sure, first of all, that we seek to understand this person is suffering. They do not have attraction to the opposite sex. That must be very difficult. They do to the same sex. And to understand that that's a deep struggle, something that if somebody says, do you have a felt understanding of this? No, I do not. But do I understand that sexual attraction is going to be a problem? Yes, I do. Because whether you're married and you're supposed to be faithful to your spouse and not express yourself in a sexual relationship, it's a challenge for everyone who pretty much walks the face of the earth. And the question is, what is chastity? And so the church is always saying, we for example, me as a celibate person, I support marriage. Okay? What does that mean? Though I am not married, I support marriage, and I support people being married and having children and raising them correctly. Support monogamous, healthy marriages that are free, total, faithful, and fruitful. Anything outside of that is sinful. So when we're with our homosexual or lesbian brothers and sisters or our transgender friends, what we do is we treat them as an individual but also as a fellow Christian. And so I think the key is to listen, to be compassionate, but at the same time, we don't have to agree with what they might be deciding to do. And we might actually say, I disagree with you, like we would to any friend. If we had a married friend who is considering an adulterous relationship, we would say to that person, I love you as a friend, but I'm not going to encourage you in this adultery. Okay? If we have a homosexual friend who's considering a homosexual marriage, we would say to the person, I love you, and I don't support you in this because I love you. Okay, there's many times in relationships with friends where they're ready to make a moral decision that we know is potentially harmful to them or is harmful to them, and we don't encourage them as a friend. If I have a friend who's drinking too much, if I have a friend who's lying on their taxes, if I have a friend, we don't encourage them in these activities. And so this is just one realm. That's very challenging because somebody could say, that means I'll never be able to get married. Although marriage has been redefined, we could say authentically, that's true. You're not called to marriage. I think the key thing that many people, I think, fail to realize is, in our culture, because we've grown up in the sexual revolution, and I think, Carol, I can say you and I are within the same range, so we can say that, right? In the same range. So I think what we realize is in our culture, we value having sex way too much, just in the sense of having sex, as if a life is valuable only if you have a sexual relationship going on. Well, that's absolutely ridiculous. Okay, Jesus Christ had the most valuable life of all lives. The ever-Virgin Mary, Mother of God, had the most valuable life of all lives. I have a valuable life, but I'm not called to sexual relations. And so does that mean that my life is diminished? Does that mean that? It doesn't mean that at all. It means my life is different. And God has a specific purpose. I think with our brothers and sisters, it's to help them see what that purpose is. They have a unique purpose. And it's a purpose that in some ways, because they don't, why is a priest in part not married? In part, it's because he's more available to a wider body of people because he doesn't have family issues going on, okay? Because he doesn't have specific children to take care of and take to the hospital. He doesn't have, so because of that, you have a wider availability of expression to love. It's just a different way of living love. It's living love the way we'll live love in heaven, okay? It's living love the way that Christ and Mary lived love, although there was a family with Mary and Joseph, but not a sexual relation. So I think it's important to say, you're not going to lose what's most important, love. And your love will be pure and holy. But a debased love will not lead to happiness. And sex outside of God's plan for you and natural law is not going to lead to the happiness, okay? That's the key. But the thing is, you have to listen a lot, okay? And you have to walk a lot and to in a particular way always be focusing on a love that desires what is best for the other and a love that is patient, okay? And I think that's what we have to be is to avoid any type of judgmentalism that's condemning or that pushes the person away, but rather an authentic love that is true, honest, frank, and simple, prayerful, and invites them, keeps them in relationship, keeps them in dialogue, okay?
Yeah, I think the important thing, too, is to not be going along or cooperating with their sin. You would not go to a same-sex attraction marriage, reception, send a wedding gift even. You know, you don't want to be celebrating their same-sex attraction. But it is, as Father Jack said, it's so important to love that other person, because very often they are not feeling loved by a lot of other people. They have a lot of anger and depression even with what's going on. I had a woman recently who did not have health insurance and was in a same-sex relationship, and she came to me with a cancer, and she said she was going to go one route to be able to take care of the cancer. They couldn't see her for 3 months, so I intervened and found another way where she could get taken care of right away. And when I called her up and told her, okay, this is your appointment, you're going to see, they're going to cover your treatment, she said, why are you doing this for me? And I said, because I take care of people who are sick. You know, so it's very important to love that person and to be able to treat them well and everything else, but not to cooperate with what they're doing or approve it. And I think you have to be very careful when you have family members and you've got children. You don't want them coming and staying at your house. You want to minimize the contact with them because the children will pick up on that. Young children can't understand this. Little girls are attracted to little girls. They play with little girls. Little boys are attracted to little boys. So they can become confused about the relationship. And all this debate about same-sex marriage and everything has gone into the general public, and children have heard this. And that's very harmful to children to hear about this under the age of like 13.
I think you've touched on another question that's come up is the cooperation angle of it. As same-sex marriages become legalized in the last several years, I know there's been some concerns that have been brought up about the process of marriage. I believe, Scott, do you have a question for us regarding that?
Yes, Father Jack. Could military chaplains be forced to violate their conscience by officiating a same-sex union?
Well, hypothetically speaking, people can be forced to do things that they don't want to do. But the question is, should, for example, a Catholic chaplain do that? And of course the answer would be no. Even if he were said you have to do this or you're going to be kicked out as a chaplain, or you have to do this so you'll be incarcerated, you just say, I'm not going to do this. So what I'd say is any culture that becomes toxic and forces you to do immoral things, cultures have done that. The question is our culture going to begin to do that? Okay, so, and remember, when we might be forced, or there might be pressure put on us to do something, but we should not do it. You read the Catechism about law, right? Just because something is a law in no way makes it right. And we as Catholics are actually called to oppose and contradict laws that oppose and contradict natural law and right revelation. So the way I would phrase that is, if you're a Christian or Catholic chaplain and somebody said you had to do this, you would have to say, I have not to do it. I will not do it. And then you'd have to let the chips fall where they may. What you would do is defend yourself based on, your right to exercise your religion and the right to conscience. What's happened recently is that right has been very much impinged upon by government legislation, saying you do not have a right to the Little Sisters of the Poor. It looked as if we were moving towards a situation where they would not only need to support abortion and contraception, but euthanasia. That these sisters who are taking care of people who are dying would also have to support recently in Washington, in the District of Columbia, recently around the country now we have euthanasia supported, wherein what's going to happen with people who are working in hospice, people who are working in hospitals? Are they going to be, quote, forced to euthanize individuals? Okay, this is a question. In Canada, you have issues where people are setting the date of their death. I've been suffering from cancer. There's a day the doctor is going to come in. You have issues like, how do you treat a Catholic patient who set a date for death and asked for the last sacraments? Right? Okay, and we're getting some very interesting dialogue among various, if somebody's going to, their final act is commit a mortal sin, you can't go in and hear their confession. If somebody's, because you have to have a firm purpose of amendment. If somebody's saying, I'm about ready to kill myself, would you come hear my confession? You have to go, you're laughing. This is happening. I think it's important that we understand that, because it is so absurd that that's the response you have. But you got to understand, there are people making these decisions and expecting a Catholic priest to come out and anoint a suicide, okay? These are the kind of issues we're running into, right? So, and you see what's happening, there's a kind of pressure that's forcing people to do this. And it's seen as like, oh, that's so merciless if you wouldn't. Well, unless somebody takes a stand and says this is wrong, to the point where you can't bless evil, it's impossible to do that. There has to come a point where we take that stand. And in many cases, that point is already here. And we need to be taking those stands. So,
Yes, the states of Washington, Oregon, California, Colorado, Vermont, and Washington, D.C. have approved physician-assisted suicide. The state of Montana tolerates it legally. There are now pieces of legislation in 20 other states to approve physician-assisted suicide. This is what happened before abortion was accepted in the United States. It has to stop. And just as we need to counsel people who come to us and say, you know, I want to have an abortion, we counsel them with love about what we can do to help them so they don't do that. We're going to have to do the same in this area and fight these physician-assisted suicide laws. There's the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops actually has some wonderful videos specifically on this subject. You can go to the USCCB website and look at them. And one of them is interviewing a psychiatrist in California who interviewed people who had survived jumping off the Golden Gate Bridge. That's apparently the most popular place for people to commit suicide. So a handful of people have actually survived. And he asked one man, what were you thinking when you jumped off the bridge? It takes 4 seconds to hit the water. He said, my whole life passed before me. I was thinking that everything that I found wrong in my life could be fixed, except for the fact that I just jumped off this bridge. So this is the way people who are contemplating physician-assisted suicide, they don't want to be a burden to others. They feel they've lost hope. Many of them are depressed and are not being treated satisfactorily for their depression. They need instead our hope and love and our care so that they die a natural death.
yes, I mean, if you propose to somebody, listen, here's the way we can do this. You can either take your life or you can live. You're basically saying, this will be easier for us if you take your life. It'll be a real burden if you stay around. And the person senses if you're giving them that option, that's nothing but malice. When you give people that option, what you're basically saying, well, we won't have to worry about you if you go snuff out your life. You'll be less expensive and everything else. And this is a horrible thing to say to a person who has special needs, a person who is ill. What our medicine should be doing is focusing on helping people who have medical anomalies, not eliminating these people. You know, when you look at something like in prenatal diagnosis, when they discover you have a Down syndrome child, and I believe 9 out of 10 of those are marked for death. No. What we should be figuring out is, how do we take care of the Down syndrome child? How do we work on these operations that these children need? You know, the young men we have here are Down syndrome kids and young adults. What a blessing to the parish. Can you imagine that if you were to take the calculus, well, we're missing another 27 of them, right? We're missing another 27 Phillips or Robbies helping us out. Okay, and these people bring joy to our lives. These are a blessing, and we're eliminating them. Okay, these are givers of love and receivers of love. These are makers of love, and they love so often better than we do, and we're killing them off because we mark them for death because they're not like us and they're not considered the same or healthy as we are. And that's just, we know that's wrong, and we've got to deal. We're looking at both ends of life, right? The very beginning and the very end. And what we're doing is we're saying you can get knocked off and killed at the very beginning, and you get knocked off and killed at the very end. Why? Because those are the most vulnerable times of life. And what does it require? It requires our attention, our care, our love, and our resources. And what should we be doing? giving them our attention, our love, our care, our resources, right? We should be spending lots of money on helping these people. Okay, so, and that's what insurance should not be going to contraception or murdering kids or all these other ridiculous things. It should be going to helping those who are suffering in this way, the palliative care that we can give them. We also have to be very attentive to the hospice care treatment we're receiving and so forth, because very often they're saying, well, you know, we can't feed them. Well, yeah, you could. They just are not receiving food in the normal way. They need food and hydration up until the day they die rather than starving or dehydrating them to death. We have to be very attentive as people approach death to know what we are doing. Do we have a power of attorney who understands what the Catholic medical field tells us we should do, or do we not? We need to have that in order now. We need to have somebody, you're speaking for me as I approach death, and we're talking to the doctor and we're upholding our rights, not letting the doctors and nurses decide to knock us off, right? You got to be careful with this. And so we have to be in here with our eyes wide open. We need to learn what we need to know about the beginning and end of life, and we need to be really in our own lives representing in the medical field, because you'll need to stand up for it. When you have, for example, preborn losses, you might have a young woman who's had a child come to the point of maybe close to just a few months from birth, and they have difficulty sometimes getting the remains of the child for burial. We need to be defending that and prepared. The doctors say, that is our child. We're going to celebrate a mass for that preborn loss. We're going to take the remains of that child. We're going to put that in a casket and bury it in a place of reverence. We have to represent on both ends of life, right? And we have to be saying what we believe, and we have a right to carry that out. That's what our religious right. Religious freedom is, that we can express this freely in the culture. Okay, so that was kind of a sidetrack, wasn't it, Annie?
It was great.
I always go off on the deep end. I'm sure everybody will be very
not.
surprised when it happens on the show. Said, all of a sudden, Father just went off on this stratospheric kind of thing. We didn't even know what the original question was, and he just went off here and there and everywhere.
I think the summary of that is that we really need to take more reverence with humanity
Yes.
and life,
Yes,
and that we will not comply if we don't.
exactly. And you know, it's not rocket science.
That's right.
Every person counts.
Mm-hmm.
We have to love them, and every person should be fully developed as much as possible in their humanity, getting ready to meet God.
Yeah.
And so every person and the whole person, that's what we're all about. And it's a great time to be Catholic. That's the awesome thing, because we're really engaging a culture that's lost the respect for the person and the respect for the whole person. And every person, we just love them into the fullness of who they're meant to be. You know, it's just an awesome thing. It's great.
Well, I think you really did lead to where I think we need to go with the next question.
Wow, it's like a
Can
segue.
you believe you did that? You did. You
All right,
segued
pulling that
right
was-
into it.
I like it.
And I think that what we touched on was how throughout your life and every day, you need to really pull up that reverence of humanity and life. And so one of the questions that we've seen, and I think, Jim, you're going to lead us in, is in our everyday work. How do we work, right? Jim, go ahead and ask that. Let me not take that from you.
Well, Father, as a business owner who wants to follow my faith, can I refuse to provide service if it violates my conscience, but I want to add something else to it? Am I obligated to?
Well, let's see here. Santa Jim? The answer is, based on the Constitution of the United States, you have a right not to do that. But there have been laws below that Constitution that have been misinterpreted that say you do not. What does it mean? It means you have to fight. If you think like, oh, I'm going to stand up and say this is my constitutional right, and I would say you should do that. If you expect not to have a lawsuit follow up, I would say you got your head buried in the sand. Okay, so we have the cases of people saying we make wedding cakes. We don't consider a wedding between two men, and so we're not going to have a wedding cake with two men kissing each other on top of it. You know, you can see the commercials now, jewelers, and they're showing weddings, and they have two women. I was like, you know, that's where you're going to watch the Super Bowl, and what do I have to watch? I have to watch two women getting married with one of the jewelers, right? So what we should be saying is we in conscience are unable to serve you in this way because we disagree with you. Okay? And the thing is, people have a right, according to our religious understanding, to do that. But if you think you're going to win it on different state levels and stuff, you may not. That's why you got to go to the court. Okay? So I would say, of course you have that right. Let's put it this way. God gives you your rights. The country doesn't give us our rights. Laws are not made to create our rights. We have our rights already by nature. Laws are meant to protect those rights. And we've had much legislation that actually contradicts the original intent of our Constitution and contradicts natural law. There's a lot of work we have to do. And it's very uneven because it can depend on what state you're in. It can depend on so many different things. But, we have a right. If I'm working at the pharmacy at Publix and someone comes up and wants contraception, I have a right to say, I'm not giving it to you. I don't think this is good medicine. Now, if you do that at the Publix, I'd like to see what's going to happen, right? Okay? But you understand what I'm saying, okay? But should we be speaking out? So I've had people, individuals working in certain places where they're disturbed because at the checkout, somebody comes up with something that's inappropriate that they're buying. It could be condoms. And so they're walking to the checkout and it's like, should I be, and we say, no, you should not. How do you work? And so what I've seen, people have been very creative and said, I'm uncomfortable doing this. Can I do something else in this business? We still have a problem though. You're still working for a company that's still, if you think about it, when I used to walk into a grocery store, they sold groceries. Now they sell things bordering on pornography. They sell contraception. They might even sell abortifacients. So now I'm walking to the same store. I say, I just want to buy some food. And when I buy food at your store, I am cooperating to some degree with supporting contraception, abortion, and pornography. Right? Because even if after a while they have these nice custody screens put over the inappropriate magazine covers, they're still selling those magazines. Okay? We got to become much more aggressive in talking to these organizations and saying, I really don't want you selling contraception at this grocery store. I don't like that. I want to buy groceries. I'm serious. You got a natural food section, and we got people doing unnatural things, and you're supporting the unnatural things that create death, but you're trying to get me to eat good food. Seriously, right? What about some NFP in your grocery store rather than contraception, right? We need to be pushing that agenda big time. And I think the ones that are going to do it actually are our teens. I mean, I think we're all so beaten down because we've grown up. We're the frog in the boiling water, right? We've grown up with the sexual revolution. I'm like, oh yeah, Well, then you start realizing when we start having situations where we have parents of a 7-year-old boy who are considering surgery, right? And so you're going like, you are going to mutilate your child. Before you would have been arrested. Anyone who would have talked this way would have been incarcerated in 3 seconds. We've reached the point where parents who are considered mutilating their son are upheld as examples of freedom of expression and love of a child. It's absurd, isn't it? Why? Because we've destroyed the language. People saying, I have a right to murder a child. No such right exists. Never will exist. It's not a right. Mm-hmm. It's not a legitimate choice. But we've abused the language so much that it's hard to see now. I was reading, it's very interesting, National Catholic Register, and there was an article about a transgender individual who is biologically a he, but referred to himself as a she. I was amazed to see in the article that the article went ahead and called him a she. Now think about that. That what somebody subjectively says is reality, if they say that, then I have to begin to say that. I was amazed that in a solid Catholic newspaper, I was reading, I said, am I really reading this correctly? Why wouldn't he just call him a he? Maybe because there'd be a lawsuit, maybe because but think about it, somebody subjectively, if I came up and said to you, I in fact am a Chinese woman, if that's what I believe, right? You remember there was a woman recently who was working for NAACP, and she wasn't actually black, but she says, but I think I'm black.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what's the difference between that and somebody saying, well, I think I'm a woman, even though biologically I'm a male? And then does that mean I have to call that person a woman? Because the person says I have to do so. It's very interesting, isn't it? But we've reached a point where you are troubled. What do I say? Because you do want to love the person. You want to enter into dialogue. You know, if you actually don't say what they want you to say, or he or she wants you to say, then it gets very difficult because you want to communicate. We want to communicate and we want to draw. So these are the complicated times in which we live. But I still think we have to be a bit more strident. We have to write and say, I don't want these in a grocery store. I don't want these in any store, but I particularly don't want these in a grocery store. Right?
I believe you said it, being Catholic is never going to be an easy thing. We're called to...
It is so entertaining. Everything's dramatic.
Yeah.
Just think about going to the grocery store is now dramatic if you're Catholic.
You know, in the medical field, in the Catholic Medical Association, we counsel students when they're applying for medical school to say what they won't participate in. Because unfortunately, even if they go to a Catholic medical school, they may be forced to participate in things that are opposed to Catholic teaching. And likewise, when they enter residency, that they also tell them up front what they won't participate in. That doesn't always work for nurses, because several nurses their consciences have been violated, even when they took a job saying, I will not be involved in abortion. Kathy DiCarlo is one example. She was forced to participate in an abortion at 22 weeks at Mount Sinai Hospital in New York, or she was told she would lose her job. She was very troubled, needless to say, after that. But the case hung around for years because the Department of Health and Human Services will not hear any private individuals whose consciences have been violated in health care with having to do with abortion. Now, Congress has the Conscience Protection Act of 2017 coming up that is going to safeguard individuals' conscience. Actually, they can sue. You know, she could have sued Mount Sinai Hospital for forcing her to do this, but under the current law, she couldn't. So it's very important to support the Conscience Protection Act of 2017 that was passed in Congress in the House last year, but did not get through the Senate, didn't get to the Senate, didn't even have a hearing in the Senate, and President Obama would have vetoed it anyway. But this year, we have a chance of getting those safeguards in place.
Well, and by following the website you guided us towards, we can get that information, update, and contact our legislators about that, and hopefully see a different outcome. At this time, we're going to take another break, and we'll be back with Ask Father Jack in just a moment. Welcome back to the Ask Father Jack show. If you'd like to submit your questions about our Catholic Church or our faith, or if you have a suggestion for an upcoming theme for our show, you can do so in one of three ways. Leave us a message on the radio studio line at 770-813-9949. Reach out to us on social media via Facebook and Twitter with hashtag AskAblazeRadio, or email us your questions directly at askablaze@stmonicas.com. At this point, we're going to turn and discuss some First Amendment issues. And Andrew, we have our first question. If you could go ahead and start us off, Reno.
Hi, Father Jack. We often hear people mention the separation of church and state. My question is, does that really mean we can't talk about religious topics in public forums?
Well, first of all, in the Constitution, there is no statement separation of church and state. So let's just throw that out. That's just a fabrication that came up later. What the Constitution does say, it prohibits the government establishing one particular religion. So our government's not going to say, you have to be Presbyterian, or you have to be Islamic, or you have to be... No, the government cannot establish. It is prohibited from establishing a particular religion. But the second part is freedom of expression of that religion. So the idea that they're proposing there is that we freely express our faith. It doesn't limit where that's going to happen. I think what happens so often in our culture is there's a huge confusion between religious issues and moral issues. And so people say, you're imposing your religion on me. If I say it's wrong to murder a child, they'll say that's a religious issue. No, that's a moral issue. That applies to everyone, whether you're Catholic, whether you are Muslim, whether you are atheist. We have to find out whether that's right or whether that's wrong. It's a moral issue. And we would say it's an issue of right reason. Okay, so we think, for example, that, and this is where Benedict is so beautiful, you can read his writings about this. He talks about how religion needs reason and reason needs religion. And when he talks about, there's two major forces that work against that compatibility. One, there's fundamentalism that actually doesn't think religion has to do anything with reason. So I'll give you an example. I met once with a gentleman, and he was outside of a youth conference, and he was telling all the youth how the priests were terrible people and leading them astray in error. So I went up to the gentleman politely, and I said, well, let's think about this. And he says, I don't think. What happens is when you have religions that don't think, that gives a bad name to religion. And that's very dangerous. There are religions that actually subscribe to not thinking, and that says God is not bound by reason. He could change all the rules in a day. We have to be very careful. That's misrepresenting right religion. Okay, because it's actually not addressing linking man to God, because if man has to stop thinking to be related to God, you lose the man. But on the other hand, if you have a reason that says there is no God, if you can't materially and scientifically verify it, those two extremes are where we are right now. We have religions that don't believe reason has any role in religion. And as a Catholics, we say fides et ratio, faith and reason. They're not contradictory. Faith tells us what we could not know using reason alone. And reason is to be used to penetrate the meaning of that faith, okay? So on the other extreme is a secularism and a materialism that denies. The radical expressions, of course, have been in communism and such, right? That denies any kind of metaphysics, anything that's beyond what is verifiable empirically and visibly using the five senses. And so what we say is we should be able to propose in public our profession of Christ. But we should also be able to propose a morality, because believe me, our government should not be creating morality. Laws should defend morality. Okay, that's the whole point. We shouldn't be creating laws that actually oppose morality. We should always create laws that defend and uphold what is moral and good. And we believe that right reason, just using the intellect, using our mind, looking at the natural law written upon the hearts of people of goodwill, we can discover just by dialogue what is appropriate. And one would be such as you don't murder an innocent child, or this is what marriage is. The attack upon fundamental human realities that have been around since the very beginning of time, these things we think are not primarily religious issues. Adam and Eve having children and raising a family are not primarily a religious issue. It's what was bred into our nature, okay? So I think in our dialogue we have to be open, but we have to distinguish. When I'm talking to somebody, I'll make a distinction between, I'm not telling you you have to believe in the Trinity. However, I am saying you and I are bound by the obligation to protect that unborn child, whether you're Catholic or no matter what it be. Does that make sense? And we should be in the expectation of the Founding Fathers. What Alec de Tocqueville would say was important is that we actually, as religious people, because we believe in God, are going to behave even if a policeman's not around. That's very important, okay? I went on for too long, though.
You're fine. You're exactly right.
No, I
It's
have
holding
Ken
us-
back there holding
he's-
up.
he's
He's
wrapping
holding
you
says,
up.
you are talking way too long, Padre.
Well, just to kind of bounce off of that, I'm going to summarize 2 questions that we have together.
I hope he doesn't do that with his wife, Pat. I hope that doesn't happen.
It's a whole different standard there.
Okay, good.
One of the questions we have is, in particular, 2 examples. One is something you would see every day, a football team who likes to pray before they go out and hit the gridiron. And you're seeing a change in the school's philosophy in allowing that to happen. And another example is just looking throughout our communities and our individual cities where there used to be, say, a Christmas tree. It's now a holiday tree or not even a holiday tree anymore. Those examples of our Christianity that are put out there, what can we do to take that back? Take back our community square, take back our community in those ways.
Well, you can do like we do at the rectory, which is we have this fantastic creche scene put under lights right out in front of our house during the Christmas season. That's a good start. People are driving through the neighborhood and they get to look at that. But I think part of it is we have to fight on the legislative level against those who claim you can't have religious representations out in public. Okay? Why? Because we have freedom of expression. And we can have Christian expressions. You can have other religions that express things. If I go into a store, you can see those who practice Hinduism. They'll have little things left out for God's. I mean, what are we going to say? No, you can't do that? Right. Yes. If I go visit, that's what they do. That's how they believe in God. That's an expression. That's a public expression. I expect them to be able to do that, okay? So that is expected in our culture, that there's an authentic diversity. What's the bottom line that we believe? Every human person has the obligation and the right to seek the truth and to live in accord with the truth. Now, what are we saying there? First of all, you have an obligation. Secondly, once you find it, you need to live it. What's our confidence? Why does the church particularly emphasize religious freedom right now? We believe that if people are free in conscience to seek the truth, when they find the truth, what are they going to find? Jesus, the way, the truth, and the life. We believe that if people are actually free in an authentic way, that they're going to end up being in the Catholic Church. That's what we believe. But you have to allow for that time for them to seek that. And you can't coerce or force. As I think Pope John Paul II would say, we propose, but we don't impose. And everyone's allowed to propose. And we think that people of goodwill who hear our proposal will be attracted to it. But you can't shut down our proposal. Okay, because what are you proposing if we can't propose? You see what I'm saying? Like we have a freedom to impose what we believe, but not impose it. Okay, so I would say we need to get out in the public square and defend the right to have a creche scene on the public square if we want. And then if somebody says, well, I want something that represents my Jewish faith, okay, have something in the public square to present this. To present this. We're not shutting down religious expression. We are expressing it, right?
Overall, we're accepting all religions that are out there, and we're embracing.
Accepting their right to
have
express their faith. We're not necessarily accepting what their faith professes, but what we're saying is you have a right, given what, because remember, if people are practicing religious freedom, what's the one thing that's there? That you cannot impose your religion upon me, but you can express it. And what that means is you can't be for a theocracy. If your religion's proposing that we got to shut down all other religions until you got your religion, okay, no, you can propose your religion. If people freely accept, if everyone happened to freely accept your religion, that would be okay. That's the Catholic proposal, actually, which is we're hoping everyone will freely accept our religion, but it will never be imposed. God is not forcing himself upon others. So remember, for religious freedom, the other religions have to buy into religious freedom. That may be difficult because it may actually contradict an aspect of their religion, okay? And so if they were to practice their religion here, they'd have to get rid of that idea, right?
Mm-hmm. How many of you have worked in a workplace and not known for years that somebody you worked with was Catholic? So, it's important that you don't have to go around announcing it, but, wear a blessed medal around your neck. When you're eating lunch or eating out in a restaurant, make the sign of the cross and say blessing before meals. Don't be afraid to just have little quiet shows of your faith. But Father, I would ask you, even satanic cults and Wicca groups will put out displays saying that they have the right
Right.
to demonstrate their religion. What would you say to that?
What I'd say is, what is religion? Religion is relinking human beings with God. That's not God. Okay, that's Satan. He opposes God. So what I'd say is, if you really want to look at religion, is that an authentic religion? That's a spirituality, but it's not a religion, because it's actually opposing God. So that would be my argument. Now, I don't know how it would hold up publicly, but what it is it's actually opposing God. So religion, you may not know, but from the derivation it means to relink with God. And this is saying, no, I'm opposing him. Okay, so it would be difficult. I think in our country, there should be a large degree of tolerance, though, because if you look at it, there's a lot of cases where we have looked at a long train of abuses, which we have put up with, but we've done that not to err on the side of burning witches or doing things like this. So I think there is scope and play within that. We going to get rid of all the things that have to do with witchcraft and stuff that are in the stores or bookstores and so forth? It's a big challenge, isn't it? But I agree with you that strictly speaking, that may not be an expression of religion if there is some baseline definition from that. I would believe the founding fathers of our Constitution saw religion as not linking yourself up with the devil, right? Or what if your religion proposes the way we placate God is we actually sacrifice a virgin every year. So we'll have a Vestal virgin and we'll throw her into the local volcano. And they say, well, this is my freedom of religion. We would say, stop, right? So there are cases where you would have a religion that actually would oppose fundamental rights and our abuse of that seeking of God. And so remember, when you look at rights, there are some more fundamental than others. So we see life as the central one, right? And so if you deny life through your religion, then it's a problematic thing. Deny innocent life. So it's an interesting problem. I haven't worked all the way through it. Now that's my opinion. That was an example of my opinion.
Well, I want to thank both of you, Father Jack, Dr. Raviel. It's been a great evening to discuss all this. I want to thank you for your faithful guidance and your insights on some really challenging issues that we're all facing and some concerns. We want to thank our live audience that's here tonight. You've been great.
Yeah.
Thank you for all the questions. Just to reiterate one more time for our listeners, if you would like to propose for us a question or if you want to submit a theme, please do so in one of three ways. Leave us a message on the radio studio line at 770-813-9949. Reach out to us on social media via Facebook and Twitter at the handle #AskAblazeRadio, or email us your questions at askablazeradio@stmonicas.com. Well, thank you very much to both Dr. Raviel and Father Jack. We hope our listeners, we hope our audience continue to dialogue with their family and friends about these issues. And until next time, may you, my brothers and sisters, remain strong in faith and convicted in heart.
Woo!